Hello, everyone. I'm joined today with Christina Hoff Sommers, also known as Based Mom by many people in the GamerGate community. In the background for the video, we're just going to be showing the Airplay afternoon panel, which Christina was a part of. And how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. How about you?
Not too bad, not too bad.
Where,
Just
where
interviewed
are you, by the way?
Silver Wolf yesterday and Koretsky, I think two days ago, or I guess 2.5 now.
Yes, I heard that interview.
What do you
It's
think of
good.
the Koretsky? Oh, okay.
He doesn't seem to like me, but I've always admired him because I thought he was very brave and took a lot of independence and initiative to allow that event to take place at all. But I guess he regrets doing it.
No, I don't think he regrets doing it at all. I think he was a little bit skeptical of you and Milo. Well, I mean, everyone's skeptical of Milo. He's fucking Milo. He's a even we don't like him. I can't speak for
Oh,
everybody, but
yeah, well, that's complicated.
yeah. Um, so I was gonna start with just talking about Gamergate, but obviously Mr. Koretsky did make an allegation against you. So I want to give you a chance to respond to that first if you want to, or do you want to talk about that later?
No, let's address it. He said he seemed very disappointed that at this event in August of 2015 in Florida, there was a panel which included Kathy Young and me and Milo Yiannopoulos. We'd all given our positions, we'd all spoken. It had gone on for a while, and then there was a bomb threat. And we went out, we were all, when we initially heard about the bomb threat, we decided to ignore it. But then the police came and forced us to leave. So we left, and what I remember is that there was a lot of milling around and camaraderie, and people were taking videos and photos, and it went on and on. And we thought, well, let's go to a cafe because by then we were all thirsty. It was very hot, and we were sort of in a no man's land. There was nowhere to go, and I was never told that they were going to convene a session in a garage and continue it. I found that out after, because after a while I was so hot and just exhausted that went with Milo in a cab back to the hotel. There was nowhere else to go. Then I heard that there'd been this lively event, and I was sorry I hadn't been there, but I didn't know about it. He never told me. I don't think I even saw him after the bomb scare.
Okay, and to clarify real quick, because I don't think Mr. Koretsky intended it as an allegation. I think he just meant it as an observation. Like he wasn't like trying to accuse you or anything. I think he was just bringing up, hey, this was what I saw from his perspective.
Yeah, he saw that, but I think his just the conclusion that he drew was the inference he made was wrong. Quite the contrary. That was back in 2015, the heyday of GamerGate. We were having meetups, and Kathy and me and Ash Scow and Milo loved to talk to people, and the idea that we didn't want to talk, or I mean, it just wasn't it wasn't what happened. But he has his position. But I will say that I thought he did a good job in a very difficult situation, because Milo started attacking him in the program, as I recall. And that really bothered me because he was being attacked on all sides, and he deserved credit rather than disparagement. And I was just very disappointed that that happened. And I hope I told him that, but I'm not sure I ever knew who he was, by sight or talked to him. So anyway, if he's listening, he
Oh,
did a good job.
I think he is listening.
Okay.
If not now, he'll probably watch the video later, since he did say he wanted to watch these.
And not to claim a special privilege of being a woman of a certain age, but I think that special session convened about an hour and a half, maybe more, after the bomb threat. it was, I mean, there was no way I was going to be able to stay out there for 2 hours in that heat. And I think one woman almost fainted. It wasn't me, but it could have been. Anyway, but I was always happy to, at that time, to talk to gamers and people associated with GamerGate. It was fascinating.
Yeah, I was gonna check and see the parking lot video to see what time it started, but it doesn't look like YouTube shows the times. It only shows the. I'm sure if I did like super tons of research, I could find the exact moment that somebody tweeted out, "Hey, here's my live stream. We're doing it by the carport," to verify how
Yeah,
long after the bomb threat it was. But um,
I
this is a
think
pretty cat. Go ahead.
Kathy told me it was a long time. I mean, I think she said an hour and a half or 2 hours, but you could ask Kathy Young, and whom Mr. Koretsky forgot that she was even there. His memory isn't completely clear on this event, but I think Kathy wrote about it. Check what she had to say. But
And
as you say, everything is documentable. So
yeah, and Paulo Munoz did say that it was over 100 degrees outside. Now, some people might have heard Koretsky's commentary and thought, "Hey, look, you didn't care enough to go to the panel, but to the after panel, I guess, the post show to continue the discussion." Like that's how some people might have taken that. And if those people have doubts, do you have anything you want to say to them now?
well, I cared about the cause. I cared about the people. I mean, I didn't get an honorarium, as I recall, to go down there. I think they crowdfunded just for our plane fare and lodging. There was no, at the time I was on a speaker circuit and getting paid to speak. This wasn't a paid. This was just because I wanted to try to defend the gamers from what I thought was an unfair attack.
Okay, so obviously the Wikipedia article on Gamergate says that it was a harassment campaign. A lot of people in the games press and in the mainstream media have said that these are misogynists who don't like women, that they want to harass them
Right.
out of gaming. You didn't think this was true?
I did not think. I mean, I thought there were elements in Gamergate that fit that description, but that was a sideshow, a fringe, and it's not only the Wikipedia entry is shocking, and anyone out there who has, well, they probably closed it, but it's just shocking. It's one-sided. You would never know from that description that there were many contingents. It was a Twitter hashtag, and it attracted gamers from around the world and across the political spectrum. And it people, some people were there because they believed there was too much cronyism in the gaming press, and others believed that they were just tired of cultural critics who viewed their hobby as pathological and pathologically masculine and so forth. There were many different reasons that people were a part of that. And to simplify it and reduce it to its most, extreme contingent is pretty. It's just not true. It's not accurate, and I think it contributes to cynicism about the media. And by the way, it's not just Wikipedia. It's now Gamergate in the mainstream press is now shorthand for misogyny on the internet.
How did you first find out about this? Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Go ahead.
How did you first find out about Gamergate?
I At the time, I had my factual feminist series where I would try to convey as best I could accurate information on women and dispute what I saw as pseudoscience or false statistics and so forth. And I read in Science News, I think, or some summary of research that it it had been discovered that the typical gamer is now a middle-aged woman, and that this idea that it was young men was false. The gaming aficionados were primarily middle-aged women. Now, as a middle-aged woman who did not particularly like or know anything about video games, I just found this surprising. So I looked at the research and saw that they had sort of cooked the books, because you could count as a gamer if you played Bejeweled or little games on in your iPhone. So they were defining gamer in a new way, and then denying that it existed, or saying it was a different group. And so I just noticed this, and I also noticed an animus against gamers, that it seemed to be this idea to deny this group. There seemed to be a lot of hostility, and I read about the history of hostility to gamers. And for years, people have been trying to implicate video games and video game players. And every time there's a mass shooting or any, social crisis, inevitably the games are blamed. And then I noticed that whereas the gamer journalists had done a pretty good job defending gamers against the claim that they were violent or that the games were conducive to violence, when this study was denying that gamers existed, or claiming that it was mostly middle-aged women, or arguing that it fostered misogyny, the gaming journalists did not defend the gamers. They joined the fray. They joined the attack. And so I just felt that I made a video in my Factual Feminist series, and that sort of got me into it. And that just happened at the same time as the GamerGate hashtag was forming and attracting followers.
Is it reasonable to draw a distinction between someone who views gaming as a major hobby for them and someone who perhaps only plays them casually?
Well, only because there is a fairly large group of people for whom it is a primary passion. I also think that these games are very difficult, and that people that play them very well, it's a real skill. And a lot of the myths about it, like, oh, well, young men that spend too much time playing video games, were likely to be violent and antisocial. Well, I haven't seen evidence of that, but I do see evidence that it's those that were very good at them, especially those who designed them and were really involved in the world of gaming at that high level. It was a training to go into tech. And also, I saw something else. I have two sons, and I had noticed that when they played video games, it was usually with a group of friends. There was a lot of laughter and excitement, and it was a expression of friendship and happiness for young men. And at the time, I just come out with a second edition of my book, The War Against Boys. So I think another thing that drew me to this, besides my interest in correcting misinformation and faulty research, was I was concerned about an intolerance for young men and for the things they liked, for who they were. So I guess I saw it as part of the war on boys. This attack on gamers, because they're primarily young men, not only, but primarily the most passionate gamers. I would say, I'm guessing here, but something to 75% young men, 25% very cool young women, but it's mainly a male obsession.
Now, you obviously have a career prior to GamerGate. You
Yes.
were a feminist, and you still consider yourself a feminist, I believe, right?
Yes. I make a distinction, though, between equality feminism, someone who wants basic fairness between men and women, and sort of a hardline school of victim feminism that instead of emphasizing that men and women should be equal, it emphasizes that women need protection from men, and that it tends to depict men as the oppressor and women as the victim. And I find that just an absurd oversimplification, exaggeration. It's not helpful to women. It discourages women, and it it's demeaning to men, and it's just not an accurate view of reality. But I had watched this movement. I wrote a book, Who Stole Feminism? And I did argue that it started in the academy, that there were a group of sort of radical thinkers who were carried away with a style of feminism that I thought betrayed the true meaning of feminism. So I call myself an equality feminist. And I take issue with styles of feminism that denigrate men. I don't think you have to denigrate men in order to help women. I think the best feminism is really a humanism, and we're in this together.
I'm very much a humanist myself, but wouldn't the more radical feminist people say that society has historically been a patriarchal society? There are still a lot of vestiges of that patriarchal society. Most people in Congress are men. Most people in business positions of leadership appear to be men. That the interests and viewpoints of men are represented well in society, and the interests and viewpoints of women are not as represented at the highest levels of society.
A couple of things. That used to be true. It's changing very quickly. But secondly, and more importantly, here's what I think is wrong with that analysis, is that people will try to argue that we live in a patriarchy by pointing to the fact that there's a disparity between men and women in the highest echelons. You know, more male CEOs of Fortune 500s, more male senators, and so forth. And all that's true. It's complicated why that's happening, but it's true. Changing, but true. But now let's look further down in the socioeconomic scale to middle class, working class, poor. And then the distribution of power and privilege, it changes. And I was always urging people to look at the fact that, yes, there's such a thing as male privilege, but there's also such a thing as female privilege. And it's men who do the gritty, dangerous jobs. When was the last time that you saw like a female window washer, at 25 flights or 100 flights above ground, cleaning windows or pitching tar, or roofers, or men do the dangerous jobs. And we've got good data on this. Most workplace deaths, like something like 94%, happen to men. And they're in those jobs. Also, vast numbers of men in prison compared to women. Even some researchers have shown that even with the same record, the same kind of crime, men are more likely to be punished more severely. There's a good evidence that people just like women more. And we also, perhaps for good reasons, we recoil at someone bullying a woman or harming a woman. And with men, it's often considered funny. So let me put it this way. I think that it's complicated, the balance of privilege and burden. Each sex has its characteristic privileges and burdens. And it's to me absurd at this day and age to call American society patriarchal when women are the majority of college graduates, winning all the prizes, far more likely to be valedictorian and so forth. They're moving ahead of boys in ways which are shocking in education. And it's very hard to get, people have written books about it, including me, but others. It's very hard to get anyone to address this problem because male problems just aren't taken as seriously as those of women. So that's why I say I'm sort of a humanist feminist, and I take each case individually, and we'll look at the best information I can to see who's right, who's wrong, what's the data say. And my verdict is that American society is pretty egalitarian. And yes, at the very, very pinnacle of success, you still find more men, but that's changing so quickly. I think Ivy League colleges, I'm not sure if there are any men that are still, well, there's a few, but it's mostly women now who are in the high administration and presidents. That's progress. I'm glad to see it as an equality feminist. But let's not too often feminists just don't celebrate achievements and simply want to focus on remaining inequities. And I think they exaggerate those inequities and don't see the complexity.
Is men working dangerous jobs an example of female privilege? Because isn't that the result of people choosing to make those career choices or not for themselves?
Oh, yes. But it's also a fact that men and women, on average, have different preferences. These lead to yet men taking on jobs that are more dangerous, and it leads to women taking jobs that pay less. So if you look at the University of Georgetown University has done a list of the best paying jobs and the worst paying jobs. Some of the lowest paying jobs are early childhood education, social work. Lots of women are attracted to those jobs. Now, you could say, well, that's just their choice. And I agree, it is their choice. And so I don't think it's because of nefarious policies. Their early childhood education is just relatively few men want to do it for a number of reasons. And even if you go into the same profession, like nursing, I once heard, I was in a debate about the pay gap. And I was trying to argue, as you were, that, well, these are people's choices. They could do other things. And they said, no, even when men and women both choose to be nurses, the men get paid more. Then when I looked more carefully, I saw that the highest paying subspecialty in nursing is I think, anesthesiology. And the men go into that disproportionately because it pays more. So they do tend to put, if you ask people, you do vocational surveys, women look more to be fulfilled, and men look, they put, earning a salary, a high salary, they put a little higher. So you get a difference. Men are willing to go into specialties that are less interesting to women. And you also found that in the nursing profession, men were willing to work crazier hours, to travel further. Now you could say, well, that's because women are tied to children and family and have responsibilities. Absolutely true. But then that's not because of unscrupulous employers cheating them out of their salary. It's just the reality of the human condition. And that brings me back to humanism. I just think that a lot of problems that people blame on patriarchy or blame on men are just the reality of human life, and that women do bear the children and appear to have a bond that's virtually unbreakable. You find women abandoning their children very rare. There usually has to be drugs and alcohol or some pathology involved, and men do it far more frequently. There's a difference there. So I think if we're more honest about the differences between the sexes, we can be more, have more reasonable policies. But I just don't see this honesty. And I think part of it is because we have so many women's groups, hundreds and thousands, invested in maintaining the idea that women are the have-nots in our society. And there's this institutional asymmetry. There aren't very few groups that point out the areas where men are, there's a disparity that's unfavorable to men. Very few groups that do that. So that's a problem.
Do you think there are some men who use gender dynamics to put women down? Whether that's someone sending sexist messages to Anita Sarkeesian or something more subtle, like not valuing the input of women in a workplace meeting?
Absolutely. But there's a lot of women who put men down. I just think if you, in the distribution of good and evil and right and wrong, there's not a big difference between men and women. Is that both sexes are capable of goodness and of its opposite. And women can be very mean. Women can be absolutely vicious. Men are more violent, physically violent, but women are, the best research I've seen and all my life experience, women can be practice a kind of relational cruelty. Both have a capacity for evil. I just don't see one worse than the other. And I think if you do think that, you're not paying attention, or you're captive to some kind of ideology that prevents you from seeing the reality of the complexity of the human condition. And I think men and women are better off being friends, not antagonists. And I long for a women's movement that puts that at its center, of helping women where there are areas. And I do think women need a lot of help, but so do men.
Okay, I don't want to get too stuck on the feminism stuff. I know most people are probably here to watch and read about GamerGate,
GamerGate, yes.
but I do think it's important to understand like where you're coming from in this, and for a couple of different reasons. One, why it's something that you felt the need to get involved with, and two, because I feel like I need to do my due diligence, and the anti-GamerGate people and people who are more skeptical of your views, I think that they probably want to hear some pushback and some good pushback, and I want to be very critical in how I interview people.
Yeah, that's fine.
The I was on like Reddit debate communities and stuff, debating Gamergate, and we would often hear, or sometimes hear, from anti-Gamergate people, like, "Hey, look, the Milo guy is a grifter who's just trying to make a name for himself or trying to promote right-wing views or whatever." And then people would also sometimes put you in that camp as well, the anti-Gamergate people. They would say, "Look, she's someone who's been criticizing feminism for decades, or aspects of feminism, I should say, certain segments of feminism. And she
Right,
also works for the American Enterprise Institute, which is seen by many people as a more conservative-leaning think tank."
right. Well, for many years, I was a philosophy professor and have always been a registered Democrat, for better or worse, a sort of a self-hating Democrat. Um, but so I never could take that seriously, that I was a right winger. I don't know that you could point to anything in my writing that is sympathetic to right wing, you know, theories and so forth. But that being said, just being a moderate in feminism and calling for a more pragmatic and reasonable approach, people ended up calling me names and pigeonholing me. And so I just have to deal with that. You know, if you don't like the American Enterprise Institute, maybe that's a reason to be skeptical initially. But if I'm citing a study, making an argument, judge it by its merits. You can come in skeptical, but you have to judge what I say in the Factual Feminist and other books and places by the merits of the argument. And I try to be scrupulous as I can. And I would sometimes, it would have made my life easier if I could have seen the world the way that a hardline feminist like Catherine McKinnon and Andrea Dworkin or Anita Sarkeesian. It would have made my life easier. It would have made my mother happier. She was very liberal, my late mother, and was upset that I'd become controversial and appeared to be an anti-feminist and all of that. And I would try very hard to understand their arguments and try to see the world the way they saw it. But then I would just kept running into fallacies that I couldn't ignore. Like, let's take Anita Sarkeesian. I watched her videos, and okay, there were many things that bothered me, but then I realized she was cherry picking. She would show examples of violence against women in videos, which horrifying. But there's far more violence against men, and then you say, well, why should there be any violence at all? Well, there's a lot of violence in movies and novels and entertainment, and we don't have evidence that this is leading to epidemics of crime. One of the things I noticed that as video game nation was forming, as more and more, mostly young men, were playing these games, violence was actually going down, and so was misogyny. I mean, millennials, each generation is less sexist and racist and homophobic than the one that preceded them. And so here we had a generation where at the time crime was going down and a lot of unpleasant bigotries seemed to be diminishing, and yet they were blamed for being the cause of these evils. So I just couldn't make sense of it. And but anyway, I don't go in trying to be just for the sake of polemics. I go in to understand, and I really think it'd be a better world if men and women understood one another better. If men and women were less prone to generalize about the other sex or demean the other sex. I think, again, I keep saying that we need each other, and if men are in trouble, so are women, and vice versa.
Do you think that the issue that people like Anita had with violence against women in games was that women were virtual women, fake women, were harmed in the video games themselves, or was their issue the way that this violence against women specifically was depicted versus the male violence?
Well, I'm sure she could point to games where almost anyone would just cringe at what they were seeing, and I'm not a fan of those games. I don't understand them. Do I want to censor them? No, because I feel, as I said, I can't watch Quentin Tarantino movies. There's just too much hideous violence. Although I did like Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, but I mean, I admire his movies, but I can't watch them. And that's what I concluded about the video games, and that she was just being unfair, maybe didn't know that much about them, or was just kind of imposing an ideology. Now, having said that, were there occasions where she made good points? Yes. And I thought it was horrible, the way she was treated by vicious members on the fringe of GamerGate and threats and so forth. At the same time, I was aware that people inside GamerGate, pro GamerGate people, were getting a lot of threats, including women.
Why do you think it is that you have Anita Sarkeesian? She does a Kickstarter for this series. She makes videos about video games. Some of the videos you can like, some of you can dislike, whatever. You can have whatever opinion you want on them. But why do you think it is that this woman, talking about feminism in video games in a very high profile way, did receive so much hate and harassment? Whether that you think that's from Gamergate people or from trolls or from like random gamers on Twitter, why did this happen? Why did it happen to a woman who's talking about feminism in games?
Well, she went into an area that was male dominated and was perceived to being unfair. So a majority of people were just offended and would criticize her in straightforward ways that were within the bounds of civil discourse. But a small percentage just went crazy. And I think that anybody who goes into a field like that, and even a politician or anybody who's become perceived as being polemical and contentious and so forth, you get a lot of pushback. And again, one of the things I noticed when I looked at harassment online, it's just assumed, well, it's women who bear the majority of, getting the threats and the insults. And Pew Research has done studies, I think it's every 2 years, and consistently show that it's men who mainly are primary. It's a small percentage of people who get threats, primarily men. Women get more sexual harassment, and men get more insults. And women react to it with greater sensitivity. Women get very much more upset by it. But overall, if you look at the internet and you look at abuse, you find majority of the targets are males. So I think it was terrible what happened to her, but I think you have to see it, the full picture. that what's terrible is that there's a lot, not a lot, but there are threats. There are too much hostility. We all know, but both sexes bear it, and it appears that men bear it or face it more than women.
Yeah, I was one of the people who made videos criticizing Anita Sarkeesian, and I think that I was like super like polite and nuanced in them. And when she left the space, when she announced that she was going to stop making videos, I even made a video like saying like, "Hey, I wish you luck with your future endeavors. We disagreed on some stuff. Here's,
Yeah.
I think that I hope wish you well." I was like very polite and civil. I disagreed with her like on the. She was saying that I'm not sure you care about this at all, but she this specific instance. But she was talking about um, Alex Vance or Alex, I believe, from Half-Life, and a character from Remember Me. This game I've not played it actually. Not remember. I played Half-Life, of course, but she was saying that why aren't we exploring her ethnic background? But it's like, well, I mean, she's a brown person who happens to be American or French in the case of Remember Me, I believe. Like, we don't know that she identifies as like part of where her ancestors came from. Like we all we know is that she's an American or a French person in the Remember Me case. Like, isn't it kind of like a little bit xenophobic to assume that because because they are of brown skin that they must have some like foreigner identification? That's like one of my critiques I made of her.
Well, do you remember her critique of a game with Bayonetta? Bayonetta was a video with a very powerful but sexualized, sexy uh, protagonist, and she was accusing it of being sexist because it appealed to the male gaze. What she neglected to care about was that first of all, it was I think about a Japanese creator who was a woman, and here's an example of when a distinction between an equality feminist and a victim feminist. She she was also offended that the character was sexy. Now this is a debate within feminism. There are pro-sex feminists and a more puritanical school that doesn't like the sexualization of women. The pro-sex feminists would say that was slut shaming. Within feminism, they would accuse Anita Sarkeesian of being, hyper puritanical and policing sexuality. And I agree with that. I mean, I don't think that having sexy women in video games is necessarily sexist. And I don't think that, as far as I can tell, most women would care. There's something else I would point out, that in recent decades, we're a society that's grappled with the fact that we were intolerant of homosexuality and of even female sexuality. There was a lot of policing and punishing and double standards. And what I was seeing at the time I was writing about Gamergate is that there was a lot of policing of and disapproval of heterosexual male sexuality. And heterosexual males do enjoy images of beautiful, sexy women, and it was an effort to pathologize male enjoyment of the female form, and I didn't like that kind of policing either. So I'm sort of libertarian about sexuality as long as no one's being harmed. But of course, here's where I differ with someone like Anita Sarkeesian and her followers. She would claim women are harmed, and so, but that depends on an argument about video games leading to antisocial behavior. And I just never thought she made the case. I don't think the previous generation of writers that video games were making people violent, I don't think they made the case. And I don't think the case was made that these games led to violence. But that's a difference between an equality feminist and a victim feminist.
The Games Press wrote articles. Well, it was mostly the Games Press. There were a couple of mainstream outlets that did as well, but there were 10 articles that were published on the same day on August 28th, 2014, and 9 articles that followed in the coming days that declared an end to the gamer identity. Um, Obviously, a lot of people are upset about this, but you were talking earlier about the positive aspects of gaming. Isn't what the Games Press was trying to do in that moment perhaps very poorly. What they were trying to do is also talk about the negative aspects of gaming. And are there negative aspects of gaming? A negative subculture where the 12-year-old kid on Call of Duty uses the N-word or makes sexual references towards a woman who's in the game.
Yeah, I think that I'll make a comparison to the Me Too movement here. The Me Too movement, initially, I was very on board. I mean, I thought that just in many workplaces, they were not living up to 21st century standards. They needed a reboot. Too many men had not gotten the message, and this was coming through loud and clear. There was a place for that in gaming, but in both cases, what quickly happened, what I saw happen with the Me Too movement, is it became more and more accusative and just beginning to depict all men as corrupt and in need of re-education, just very harsh indictment of society, and then a lot of false accusations, wrongful, exaggerated, baseless accusations, and we entered a kind of gender war zone. And I think what happened with Me Too, it was in some ways we saw this happen with the critiques of Gamergate. The critiques of gamers. Initially, some good points. I think a lot of gamers wouldn't have minded. It just went too far. It became too aggressive and unforgiving. And that's just no way for a social movement to advance. I mean, you can scare people and bully them, and people will, for a while, go along with you, even if they don't agree, because they're intimidated. But it doesn't lead to progress. It leads to its opposite. It breeds fanaticism.
In my interview with Silverwolf CC yesterday, she talked about how she is a bisexual woman who likes sexy female characters. However, she also talked about how there are different ways to do it, and that some ways can present the framing of the scene in a objectifying way, and other ways don't. What do you think of this?
I think that what she said and making a video about that and pointing that out, and game developers can maybe learn from it, maybe change if they want to, if they agree with it. There's always room for improvement and for evolving, and I think that's all to the good. It's just when it becomes it sort of hardens into a movement that brooks no criticism and is eager to implicate others in some kind of social atrocity without any concern for what this does to them or what it does to your movement. I just see a lot of destructiveness with these causes that go too far, and I saw it a long time ago. I saw it as far back as this dates me again, but when I was in graduate school, I was interested in some of these theories in feminist theory, but I immediately saw that they were those that were most passionate about them were just simply were reality challenged. The world was not the way they described it, and so that's a long-winded answer to your original question about do I think that it was reasonable what she said? Yes, and people can learn from that, but I don't think it was reasonable much of what Sarkeesian and the those that were promoting her point of view, I don't think that was ultimately reasonable or progressive.
It seems like you're linking the attitudes and behaviors of the games journalists and those who criticized Gamergate with a larger, perhaps older attitude that you also see in some people in the feminist community towards men and boys.
Well, that's why people ask, why did you get interested? You're not a gamer. Absolutely true. But I was able to see that the battle that I was fighting within feminist theory, that it was playing out in other fields. And by the way, after Gamergate, there were these battles raged in young adult literature and in poetry circles and in among in sports, all sorts of areas, you would find this sort of where it was reduced to a kind of men versus women, rather than let's try to make this better for everybody. I kept seeing that, so that's there were many things that interested me in the battle over video games, but not the least is the time I entered it was when GamerGate was erupting, and it was largely I felt that the game journalists were accepting uncritically a particular version of feminism that and were ignoring that there were other voices within feminism. They were not listening. They weren't listening to us, to any critics of radical feminism or hardline feminism. And that bothered me. And I thought I had to speak up. And I thought the gamers should know that you're not a sexist just because you don't believe and agree with Anita Sarkeesian. You can still be a feminist and disagree with the view that she was promoting of all video games.
Some people in the Gamergate community had developed a negative attitude towards the word feminist and preferred terms like egalitarian instead. Do you think there's
Right.
still value? Well, first off, do you think that that's sexist of them? And second, do you think that there is still value in using the term feminist to describe the basic definition of LOL, we just want equality?
Yeah, I don't know. I think now more than before, people recognize there are many schools of feminism, and so I think the term is. There was a while where people just associated it with being extreme. In fact, there have been, maybe this continues to be the case, there have been a number of public opinion polls, and they'll ask you, do you call yourself a feminist? And the majority of women say no. And then they say, well, do you think that men and women should be treated equally? Do you think they deserve equal rights? And they all say yes. So how can that be? And one pollster asked women, well, if you believe in equality, why don't you call yourself a feminist? And the answers they gave were that it's too hostile to men, and that it's, what was the other, too extreme. So I think the word, when I wrote the book, Who's Still Feminism, that I warned about this, that this is a important movement, and one of the great chapters in the history of the struggle for human rights was the women's movement, and it was, but a small group had seemed to hijack, and in the name of feminism, were saying and doing a lot of things that I thought, and others, were not in this true spirit of equality. So I'm not ready. I just can't give it up. I've been a feminist all my life. My mother was a feminist in the old school style, and I think there are a lot of, there's still sexists out there, and it's important to keep that movement alive and its history known to people. So I'm not going to give up. I'm going to try to do all I can to make it a mainstream and reputable movement for equality. It doesn't have to be angry and preachy and puritanical.
You've talked about how there have been other controversies or quote unquote culture war battles in other hobbies and fields. Why do you think it was the gaming community where this blew up into a massive thing?
There are a lot of gamers. I think it was even who was it? Ezra Klein, pretty early on in 2014, I think, in Vox, maybe 2015. No, I think it was 14. He was a little. He actually wrote a pretty good piece about GamerGate. It was pretty fair because he pointed out, wait a minute, there are gamers. There are millions of gamers. A lot of them are liberal, and they're completely shocked to be called sexist and homophobic, and they don't. This is he made it clear that he was a little surprised by this attack. I think many people were, and I think that one of the reasons GamerGate grew was there were a lot of people on the sidelines at first, gamers who just thought, well, what's going on here? But then when they saw the attacks And what would happen is the game journalist would write something very censorious, critical about gamers, and then it would be picked up by the New York Times. And then so someone who was a passionate gamer, who had many, many friends who'd gone to events and knew that it was a reasonable group of people, found the entire group just maligned in the press, in the Washington Post, and over again in the New York Times, and NPR and so forth. It was ridiculous. It was so. I think it just it blew up because it was an attack on hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of people who didn't like it, didn't appreciate it, and spoke up.
When I was talking with Koretsky, he said he wondered if Anita Sarkeesian would have received. Sorry, if Anita Sarkeesian was a male, making the same arguments, would she have received as much dislike?
Yeah, probably. Although, yeah, I mean, it may be that, and I don't know. I think that a man that made those videos would have been destroyed. I don't think, and I think for most people, not all, there's a little tiny bit more inhibition about being savage to a woman than a man. So I think it would be just unrestrained savagery if a male had made those videos.
It's interesting you mentioned Ezra Klein's article. I actually read that, not when he wrote it. I wasn't involved in GamerGate until 2015, but I read it and I actually very briefly mentioned it in my book, my first book on GamerGate.
Uh-huh.
And I actually reached out to him to interview him possibly, so he might be a part of this project. We'll see what he says.
That'd be good. I figured he must be a gamer. I'm not sure he said that in the article, but he seemed to know a lot about it.
Yeah, I think he did because I actually listen to his podcast occasionally. I think he actually has talked about playing games before, but I have no idea. I'd have to go back and like. I don't
like
care
his
enough to do
podcast,
the research to find out if he's a gamer or not. Like it doesn't really matter.
I know.
Obviously you're a learned person. You've been around for a long time. No offense. That's a compliment. You've experienced a lot of life, and you've worked in a lot
Yes,
of
I'm an
environments. That's what I mean.
age enhanced woman.
Yes. So you've been in a lot of professional environments and stuff like that. If you were the editor in chief of one of these gaming sites and some of your employees were accused of an ethical violation, and it seemed like there probably might be something there, let's say it was a credible accusation, how would you respond to that as the editor in chief?
Well, I would try to get to the truth of it and do all I could to encourage collegiality and kindness. I'm a strong believer in that, and I wouldn't. I just wouldn't want to work in a place where people were savaging one another and trashing each other. I just don't. It's not conducive to flourishing in any way. So I wouldn't do it. I mean, I wouldn't put up with it.
Obviously, you were at SPG Airplay, and we talked about this a little bit. You mentioned that you had a lot of respect for Koretsky. I do too. But this event, what do you think this event showed the world?
Did anybody? I mean, Did the world pay attention to it?
Well, that's
I didn't get the
not yet.
sense that it. Oh,
Maybe historians will.
Boy, historians will have a lot to go through. There's so much written about Gamergate, and every once in a while I'll meet somebody and they'll say, "Can you explain it to me?" And then I'll try. I think it's falsely attributed to Einstein that he said, "Well, if you understand a problem, you should be able to explain it in simple terms." I think if you understand Gamergate, you probably can't explain it.
That might be true, but do you want to try?
Well, I have been. I think. I mean, simply by stating what I saw is that it was hundreds of thousands, if not more, gamers who found themselves accused of being misogynist. Not just them, that the games they played, just a relentless stream of abuse coming from the media, and it was mostly false, exaggerated. There were grains of truth, but it was a complicated movement with, as I said, untold numbers of players. And like Occupy Wall Street or Black Lives Matter, or any, there was a pathological fringe. And the media, when it came to, say, Black Lives Matter, it knew the fringe was there, but it chose to pay attention to the center and what was serious in the movement. It was just the opposite with GamerGate. They focused on the fringe and ignored the middle and ignored the reasonable center.
Well, that's one argument that anti-Gamergate people can make. Couldn't they also argue that this started in part because a guy had a bad breakup with his girlfriend who was a semi, well, who was a public figure, and he wrote a blog post detailing that breakup. In that blog post, he mentions briefly, I believe, I have not actually read the Zoe post, I have no idea, but he mentions that Nathan Grayson was one of the people that she cheated on him with, and then some people on the internet talked about games journalism and that aspect, but a lot of other people were like talking about the drama, and some people who were talking about the drama went like really bad to try and harass her or wanted to harass her and slut shame her. And like that is like sort of the spark that kicked off the discussion about games journalism in that moment. And later on Gamergate, or if you think Gamergate began in that moment, it started Gamergate then.
Well, that's disputed because I think a lot of GamerGate people didn't really know much about that or weren't interested in it. They were concerned about what was happening with the way games were reviewed, that there was, I don't know, what used to be called payola, or, just a kind of cronyism among game reviewers and developers, and some people were in and out. And so there was a lot of resentment already brewing. And then that was the spark. But I don't think that people were reacted to the salacious sex, although certainly some were, because people do. But probably they thought that, I guess it was a Kotaku that was Grayson. He was writing for Kotaku, and
He
they
wrote
thought that,
for yeah, he wrote for
what
Kotaku, though the main one ethical so he wrote for Kotaku, but he also wrote for Rock Paper Shotgun, and one of the main issues with with Mr. Grayson's work was with a Rock Paper Shotgun article, though there was also probably yeah, it was an ethical violation, probably you could say, with Kotaku as well, but that was a minor one compared to the Rock Paper Shotgun violation. Sorry, I know way too much about this stuff.
you know too much. But I do remember listening to an interview with the editor of Kotaku. Was it Totilo? I could be. I
Stephen
can't remember
Totillo.
his name.
Actually, there were three articles, but those were the two main ones. The third one might have been before they were officially friends slash dating. Um, so there might not have been an ethical violation there if they were just acquaintances. But the other two were ethical violations, especially the rock paper shotgun article. Anyway, I'm so sorry. Please, yes,
Well,
Stephen Totillo.
but I do remember that the editor was concerned that if there had been a violation of uh, journalistic ethics, and he decided to make if he'd been unclear about the policy, he decided to make it clear. And I do think that's probably one good thing that has happened, is I think the game journalism improved in terms of just being a little more open and less cronyism. And more importantly, as Koretsky pointed out, there's just more sites now, more places to review games, and less opportunities for corruption, fewer opportunities.
So you kind of hinted at this, but why didn't the media cover SPJ Airplay? Largely, there were like a couple articles, but
I don't know. And what was interesting was how hard people tried to prevent the event from happening altogether, or at least the panel, two panels, I guess, about GamerGate. It was almost as if there were activists that just did not against against GamerGate, that just didn't really want the voices, the reasonable voices inside to be heard, and it's just too bad. I think a lot of things that have gone wrong in journalism, which most journalists would agree, there's very, very low public trust for journalism today. And I think GamerGate was an early warning sign of just what happens when the press prefers a narrative over, a simplistic narrative of good and evil over complicated truth. And it's what journalists do when they go for the narrative is they'll get clicks, they'll get, their certain contingent, certain followers, excited and so forth, but it's very divisive, and it's driving our society a little crazy. And I'm hoping that we're over the worst of it, and maybe journalists are getting back to their job of being a little more neutral and a little more careful about how they tell a story. But I think many of us watched in horror as we were in the middle of something and watched them simply lie about it. Well, I don't want to say lie. Maybe they believed it. So if it's a lie, they were misrepresented. It was a misrepresentation, a serious misrepresentation, and we all saw it. And it's distressing, dismaying, and it drives people. I think it drives people crazy, and I think it did drive some people to the far right.
Yes, obviously the media has talked a lot about Gamergate, either one, causing Trump to be elected, or two, causing an alt-right pipeline where people would become angry about the games journalists and the social justice warriors attacking their games from their perspective, and then allegedly they'd become far right within like 5 years. Do you how much truth do you think there is in either of those claims, the Trump claim or the pipeline claim?
I think there's again a grain of truth. There was a time, I know, where Breitbart got involved, and then Steve Bannon had some plan to recruit people and so forth. But if you go back and look at the 2016 election and how Trump got elected and why it was, really voters in, I don't think it was gamers in Wisconsin and Michigan that were, put Trump in office. It was had so much to do with what was happening with a lot of working class people in those states, and and many of them who had voted for Obama in the previous election. The Trump base was based largely of working class people that had voted for Obama in the previous election. And anyway, I just don't see that the gaming community and the events in Gamergate were a part of that phenomenon. Now, whether or not it did feed into what came to be the alt-right, there's some truth in that. And it's regrettable.
Some people would say
my dog is starting. Go ahead.
Oh, you're fine.
I'm going to have to leave at 1:15. I should have told you that.
Okay. Oh, so 5 minutes from now?
Yeah.
Oh,
well, 1:20 at the latest.
Okay. Do you want to do like a lightning round?
Yes.
Okay. Some people would say that Trump's election was was at least partially due to racial resentment rather than just pure economic anxiety. What do you think of that?
Again, it's oversimplification. I mean, again, and from what I've seen, the best analyses I've seen is that the Trump base, as I said, were disaffected Obama supporters, disaffected Democrats in Michigan and Wisconsin and Ohio.
Oh, God.
That's my dog. I'll go out on the
Sorry, I'm
porch.
trying to be super fast because we don't have much time.
That's okay. Are you
Some,
there?
yeah, I'm here.
Yeah.
Some critics
Okay.
argue that GamerGate was mostly or entirely right wing. Do you think that's accurate?
No, no reasonable person can think that. If you go back and look, it was so many people from so many places, and it was also it wasn't just men. There were a lot of women. I mean, there were more men, but there were a lot of women in GamerGate. I knew them. I met them.
Did you interact with any anti-GamerGate people? What was that like?
Oh yes, I have uh, friends who were warning me, stay away from it. Oh, they hated games. A lot of people don't like games, and especially as an academic, uh, people just assumed they were bad and wondered what I was doing, and I would try to explain to them. Uh, but I don't think I ever met any of the activists. I wouldn't have minded meeting. I wouldn't have minded debating them. I can sort of get along with anybody. I'm willing to listen to them.
Do you think most people in GamerGate did a good job condemning harassment?
A lot of people tried. I don't. I mean, it varied. I mean, there were. I remember within GamerGate, there were people who tried to referee conversations, and that people would be thrown out if they became abusive or misogynist or anything like that. And from my standpoint viewpoint, I saw people condemning it. And the other thing is, if you really cared about games, you knew that this harmed the reputation of gamers and Gamergate. Every time, and that's why people suspected it might even be the other side who were making the threats, because it was so harmful to the cause of the gamers.
Some people would say
So
when you, oh god,
yeah, go ahead.
some people would say that when you say something like some people thought it might have been the other side, they might say, well, that sounds kind of like victim blaming, even if there were a couple of instances where people did possibly do that. But it sounds like you're putting the blame for the harassment on the victims, possibly.
Well, I'm not putting it, but I think it's interesting is that were the worst kind of abuse, just horrific things that happened to several women who were criticizing gamers. No one to this day knows who did it. It remains an open question. And at one point, I don't know if it's who knows what's true, but it was some like the character in Brazil was outed, and he was just a troll. Got thrills from causing disruption. I mean, that happens.
What can the
So
media? Oh god,
yeah. Go ahead.
sorry, I'm like really trying to rush through.
No, let's
'Cause
go. Let's
I'm
go.
only
I
picking like
talked too
the
much.
top questions that I wanted to ask, or that I
Yeah.
think would be good to ask. But fuck, now I lost my train of thought. Okay, what do you think the media can learn from how they covered Gamergate?
Well, first of all, talk to people on both sides. Find the resist the temptation to simply find the side you agree on, and then cherry pick and find the craziest person on the other side. It's hard not to do if you're a passionate activist, but a journalist shouldn't be a passionate activist.
If a journalist who got Gamergate wrong in your eyes is reading this now, what do you want them to reconsider?
The fact that they just got it wrong, and to learn a lesson about being a good journalist. And also, as I said, if you care about the well-being of society, we're not helped by these simplistic narratives, and this reducing everything to victim and victimizer. Stories are complicated. Occasionally they aren't. It's just a clear case of good and evil, but usually it's not, and it's worth trying to find voices from both sides. Reasonable voices are there, typically, not always, but usually, and try to find those.
What was your
And then let
favorite?
the reader decide. Let the reader decide once they've heard a fair accounting of both sides. That did not happen. It rarely happened. Occasionally it did. There were some occasional fair articles, but those were very much the exception.
What was your favorite moment during Gamergate?
I remember a meetup in Washington, D.C., And what I loved about it is it was just a cross section of humanity. It was men and women, and there was like a group of gay women who were gamers and who were fed up with the critics of GamerGate, talking to them. And it was just, and then there was an insane bomb threat. And Arthur Chu, he didn't do the bomb threat as far as I know, but he was tweeting madly about us, and even tried to get the owner of the bar not to allow us to have a meetup. And I guess my favorite moment was I think the owner of the bar was from Afghanistan, and he said, I fled a society that was full of threats, and this is a democracy. I'm going to let this go on.
I like that guy
And
or
I
girl. I
like.
don't know
Do you
who it
remember
was.
him?
No, I don't. I wasn't there. I hosted the St. Louis meetups though. But
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
awesome. He sounds or she sounds. I don't know. Was it a male or a woman?
A man. Yeah,
Okay. He sounds awesome.
he was great. That was a great moment.
All right. Last two because I know we're super pressed. If you could have changed, no, that's not that. What would you personally have done different? No, actually, no. Let's do this one instead. What have you personally learned from GamerGate?
Oh, what have I learned? I guess I keep learning over and over again. At the very beginning of my career, when I saw what I thought were some unhealthy developments in feminist theory, I thought that it was just enough to um, point out the fallacies and tell people where I thought they went wrong, and that everything could be fixed by um, clarity and reason. And what I learned in Gamergate is that yeah, that's probably not enough, and that people will misrepresent reality, and journalists will reprint it. And what's happened now, if you look up Gamergate, it's been reduced to just a campaign of misogyny. They were able to do that. And so I've seen the power of the power that comes from a combination of misinformation and moral passion, and it did not lead to progress. It led to just more confusion and misunderstanding.
All
So
right.
I was an example of how powerful that combination can be.
All right. Last question. Some people reading this might hold a negative view of GamerGate. Is there anything you want to say to those people?
I would just say you probably don't understand it. And if you can find if you have a negative view of Gamergate, it's just like saying you have a negative view of, I don't know, novels or human life or something. It was everything. It was a cross section, and it showed people at their best and worst, and that's pretty much the human condition. And we want to improve. We want it to be better, but it's probably made better by uh, trying to be a little more reasonable and having a little more understanding for both sides. So I would recommend it. And even me, I mean, I go back and think, I do think, well, should I have focused more on, what was genuine sexism in the games, or genuine sexism? I tried to a little bit, but maybe I could have done more of that. But again, it's just, it's very hard in something so vast as the world of video games to identify something that's, that's clearly a wrong, because there's just, and that represents the whole, because there just isn't. It's just complex. I keep saying that, but it's complex. So try to be a little more understanding and a little more curious.
Awesome. Well, hey, thank you so much, Christina. This has been fun, and I do apologize about rushing towards the end there. And I think I said fuck at one point, which like is fine in gamer culture, but like obviously you're a professional media person, so like it's a little bit
Oh gosh, I don't
different.
care.
So okay, cool.
That's another
Okay,
thing.
cool.
Women aren't prudes.
Well, I don't, not because you're a woman, but because like you're a professional person, and I'm like a
Oh,
gamer.
as if we don't say. No, it's fine.
Okay. Well,
All
hey,
fine. And I love what you're doing.
thanks. And if you're bored tomorrow night, I know somebody who's hosting a debate on the patriarchy and Gamergate, and they want to talk to you. They're like, I want to talk to Christina Hoff Sommers. So if you want to debate the patriarchy and Gamergate tomorrow night, you can. I can get you in touch.
I don't know. Okay. All right.
All right. Well, thanks for coming on.
Thank you. Bye
All right.
bye.
Bye. Cool. I will raid Melina on Twitch, and I'll raid. Thanks for watching, everybody. I hope it was a good discussion. Stitch and Adam are live. Or they're about to go live, it looks like. Okay. Cool. Well, thanks for watching, everybody. Hope it was a fun discussion, and you hopefully got something out of it. Hopefully, it's good material for the book. I'm basically just publishing everything in the book, transcript-wise. Probably maybe some editing to make it look more like conversational, better. Like, but otherwise, a transcript. Maybe edit like a couple of like meta stuff. But cool. Well, hey, thanks.